Cynthia was born on a humid afternoon in Lagos, her first breath greeted by the salty tang of Atlantic air and her mother's soft tears. Her father, a man of grand promises and empty pockets, vanished soon after her birth, leaving behind a fading photograph and a debt the family could not repay. Her mother, barely in her early 20s and still learning how to be a woman, found herself thrust into the role of both parents. She wept in the night, cradling Cynthia's tiny body and wondering how she would raise this child alone in a city that devoured dreams. But rainbows often come after the storm, and in Cynthia, her mother saw a dazzling light. She devoted every waking hour to giving Cynthia a childhood filled with tenderness, reading her bedtime stories by candlelight, teaching her songs of hope even when her own heart ached. Neighbors would smile at the sight of them. The little girl, with eyes like polished ebony, running barefoot through the red dust in hand-me-down dresses, her mother trailing behind, laughter echoing down the street. From her earliest days, Cynthia carried the weight of her mother's sacrifices on her slender shoulders. She excelled in school as though she possessed an extra pair of hands. Top marks in class, speech competitions won with stars in her eyes, and a gift for reciting poetry that made her teachers weep. Her mother, once timid and withdrawn, began to hold her head higher, proudly declaring her daughter the trophy of my heart to anyone who asked. When Cynthia received her University of Lagos admission letter to study law, an accomplishment that seemed impossible for a girl from their neighborhood, the entire street danced. She graduated with a first-class degree, her robes catching the sunlight as her mother wept tears that tasted of both joy and relief. In that moment, Cynthia's future stretched before her like an open road, paved with opportunity and crowned by her mother's unwavering pride. For a time, it seemed the world would bend to Cynthia's brilliance. She secured an internship with her maternal uncle, Peter Okoye, a respected attorney whose influence was whispered in the chambers of power. To Cynthia, it was a connection to the system she dreamed of joining, an opportunity to hone her skills, to learn the art of justice. Her mother beamed at the thought, "My daughter, the Lord will be your muscle." And so, Cynthia stepped into his house, clutching her portfolio and her mother's blessing. She told herself that in the cool corridors of Uncle Peter's home, she would become invincible, shielded by family and by her own talent. Then the world shifted on its axis. One late night, while the rest of the household slept behind locked doors, Cynthia sat in the dimly lit sitting room, flipping through a law journal. The lampshade cast long shadows across the patterned upholstery, and the only sound was the distant hum of traffic. That's when Uncle Peter entered, his face the same kindly mask she had always known. She did not register his steps until he was close, his presence overwhelming. He said, "Shh, don't be afraid," and placed a hand on his shoulder. In that instant, her entire life fractured. The kindness she once trusted turned vicious in his hands. She froze, mind racing, heart pounding, but the act was swift, brutal, and irreversible. By the time it ended, her hymen was torn, and her spirit felt shattered beyond repair. Her uncle whispered, "No one will believe you." And in her stunned silence, she believed him. For weeks afterward, Cynthia moved through her days like a ghost. The campus chapel, once a sanctuary, felt cold and accusing. The friends who laughed with her before now seemed distant, their casual conversations tormenting her. She could not face her mother's joyful eyes, so she maintained a mask of composure, hiding the swelling bruise on her truss and the jagged wound on her soul. She told herself she was strong, that time would heal, but every night she woke drenched in sweat, replaying his face, his voice. Shame wrapped around her like a suffocating cloth. She isolated herself, skipping internship meetings, avoiding phone calls, and retreating into the solitude of her room. When her mother asked what was wrong, Cynthia forced a smile and whispered, "I'm fine." A lie that tasted like bile. Gradually, a bitterness took root. Cynthia felt abandoned by justice, betrayed by the one adult she should have been able to trust. She grew hungry for something, anything that could fill the cavern of her emptiness. That need led her to Lara and Tino, two older women in her cohort who wore expensive stilettos and spoke with the confidence of people who had found the world's shortcuts. They invited her out one Friday night, promising laughter and distraction. In the mirror that evening, Cynthia hardly recognized herself. The bright-eyed scholarship girl was gone, replaced by someone hollow, cautious, and eager to be seen. Lara bought her a drink, Tinu bought her another. They talked about sugar daddies who sent cash via bank transfers and private jets that landed in Abuja. Cynthia listened, transfixed by tales of weekend trips abroad and envelopes stuffed with bills. She had always believed that self-worth came from accomplishments. Now she wondered if it could be measured in dollars. What began as a single encounter soon cascaded into a pattern. Older men paid to spend the night, and Cynthia convinced herself she was simply exercising her agency. She rationalized each step. I still attend my lectures. I'm still the same bright girl. But gradually, the lines eroded. One man turned into many. She celebrated her 22nd birthday in Dubai, sipping champagne in a sky-high hotel suite, sending selfies to her mother with tears behind her smile. When she returned, she found that the money never quite lasted. The lifestyle demanded more. She endured multiple abortions, each termination a physical and emotional scar. And she suppressed the guilt behind layers of makeup. She rose through the ranks of what the tabloids called the Rose Girl Society, admired for her poise and whispered about for her connections, governors, senators, businessmen. She felt invincible, buoyed by the illusion of power and the validation of expensive gifts. Yet beneath the facade, her body was betraying her. After a night of ecstasy and champagne, she woke with a chill that settled deep in her bones. She ignored it until the fatigue became unbearable. A trip to the clinic revealed a reality she could not deny. HIV positive. The nurse's eyes were sympathetic but distant, and the diagnosis felt like a public execution. Cynthia sat alone in the exam room, hands shaking as she processed the news. This virus, invisible yet unstoppable, would follow her for the rest of her life. Every justification she had built, protection, consent, control crumbled in that moment. She felt rage at Uncle Peter, at her own naivety, and at a world that offered no real sanctuary for survivors. For months, Cynthia vanished. The news feeds speculated, friends whispered, but she did not answer messages or open her door. She lay in darkness, staring at the patterns of moonlight that filtered through her bedroom window. She contemplated the point of living, weighed the emptiness of survival against the relief of giving up. But deep within, a small spark refused to be extinguished. One morning, she rose and stared into the mirror, into her own haunted reflection, and made the choice. She would speak. If silence had nearly killed her, her voice might just save another. Re-emerging into the world was harder than she imagined. The first time she spoke publicly, her knees trembled beneath a tailored blazer. She stood before an audience of young women and NGO volunteers, her palms sweaty around the microphone. She told them everything: her father's absence, her academic triumphs, the rapes by her uncle, the descent into transactional relationships, the abortions, the HIV diagnosis. She named the monster in her uncle's guise of family, and she named the shame that nearly consumed her. Some in the crowd gasped, others wept. By the time she finished, the room was silent, awe and sorrow mingling in the air. Cynthia then dedicated herself to advocacy. She partnered with local organizations to provide workshops on consent, mental health, and sexual health. She visited secondary schools, university auditoriums, and rural communities, adapting her story so every girl, from the city slum to the village compound, could see themselves in her. She urged survivors not to bear their burdens in silence, and she challenged society to dismantle the assumptions that blamed victims and exonerated abusers. Each time she held her hand, each time she saw tears of recognition and relief, she felt a measure of healing. Her scars, once symbols of her disgrace, had become emblems of her resilience. Her mother, after months of agonizing worry, embraced her with tears that carried both sorrow and pride. "My daughter," she whispered, "you have turned your pain into power." Cynthia realized that forgiveness of her uncle, of her own mistakes, even of the world's cruelty, was not a single act, but an ongoing journey. She continued her medication, attended support groups, and reclaimed her identity as a law graduate, a survivor, a mentor. The acronym HIV, once a death sentence in her mind, became a badge of survival, a reminder that life, however fragile, is worth fighting for. Today, Cynthia's name is known not for the silken ties to wealth or the glittering nights, but for her courage to speak truths too many keep hidden. She writes articles, consults on policy, and trains community leaders on trauma-informed care. Every day, her story ripples outward, inspiring others to break their silences and find strength in vulnerability. She is still the apple of her mother's eye, but now she is also the champion of countless young women who recognize themselves in her journey. In the stillness before dawn, Cynthia sometimes sits alone with a cup of tea, reflecting on the past that brought her here. The memory of her mother's tears at her birth, the bright smiles of graduation day, the darkness of that night in Uncle Peter's house, the dizzy highs of a life bought with money, and the crushing reality of a diagnosis, all swell together like pieces of a shattered mirror. But in each fragment, she sees proof of her humanity, the capacity to love, to hurt, to fall, and ultimately to rise. Her story is a testament to the truth that pain does not define us, our response to it does. From the innocence stolen in a moment of betrayal to the empowerment found in speaking her truth, Cynthia embodies both the fragility and the ferocity of the human spirit. And in sharing her voice, she transforms the shame of the world into a beacon of hope, reminding us all that even the broken can heal, and that every life, no matter how wounded, can shine again.
Tighten the lips. Now there's nothing in the air I breathe, nothing in the nights I see. No spark, no light, no gravity since you walked away from me. It's all gone, it's all still, like time forgot how to feel. You were my everything. Now I've got nothing. I stare at the sky, but the stars don't shine.